Hi. My space opera novel, Stormfleet, book one of the Pillar Universe, has gone free all over the web. So check it out wherever ebooks are found, and you can get it for free now. So give the series a shot. Also, this is episode 100 of Alive After Reading, and I feel like maybe I should have a party or something. Well, share and enjoy.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello and welcome to Alive After Reading. I'm Tim Niederreiter, and with me today is author Michael Anderle. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Hey, how are you doing? I appreciate you having me on.
Well, I appreciate you being here because honestly, I have followed a lot of your doings out there in the world, and you have written an impressive number of books especially for such a short time period. I mean, new pulp. That's kind of what you do, right? I mean, maybe you don't call it that, but it's quite impressive how fast you get work out there.
I like that. New pulp. I like that phrase. I'm going to have to abscond with it.
Well, at least you're going to get something out of this conversation. Then you can at least count that.
There you go. No, I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you asking me for it. And I enjoy talking about this stuff. I mean, as you are probably a longtime reader, so am I. And, I just don't get tired of discussing this subject.
Yeah, and it's always a good time. So as far as what you've been working on, obviously, I think people should know about the Kurthurian Gambit. If they don't already, though, remind people and about your other stuff too.
All right, so Kurthurian Gambit is certainly my first book. Death Becomes Her came out in early November 2015, and that was right during NaNoWriMo. So I decided, hey, I wrote this book in a couple of weeks. I bet I can write another one in a couple of weeks, and I put the second book out 9 days later. And then I put the third book out November 23rd, 2015. And, I can't suggest that they had great covers or great editing, but by the fourth book, December 15th, I had a little bit of a following, and they were very encouraging. And so as, readers encouraging me as a new writer, it meant all the world to me. So, pushed harder and kind of grew that success, and it took off. And part of it was the fact that since I am a whale reader, which is a coin that I termed based on a whale gambler and just a reader, of course. And then, we moved forward. So it is a amalgamation of different genres that I liked. And I wrote this stuff when I was 48, understanding that if I had any success, I was going to have to write a lot of books. And so I chose genres that were appealing to me so I could actually write in different ones simultaneously. So I started with paranormal, vampires here on Earth. And the reason I started on Earth is so I wouldn't have to do a whole lot of world building because I'm kind of lazy like that. And so I, did paranormal. I created a science fiction hook so that before you know it, 7 books later, we're going into near space, and 14 books later, we're going, where no man has gone before.
Yeah, that's a pretty impressive series, just by spine count, but also because the scope is really interestingly broad. It starts off very urban fantasy kind of feeling.
Yes, yeah, it's a very paranormal, and that was and that was on purpose. I mean, I understand that a lot of people were a little bit put off, if you will, by what would you do with my vampires, and so we marketed it more for the vampire side, and the first 7 books have very vampire werewolf under leanings, but you learn that it is actually aliens that help create our paranormal reality.
Yeah, and that happens in book 1, if I'm not mistaken, correct? You find it doesn't take you a huge amount of time to figure that out as far as the series.
No, it doesn't. It's half a book when you really understand what happened, which causes everybody, if they are in it still at half a book, that's when the head kind of pops up and makes a 360-degree turn and going, what?
Yeah, so you make your readers do the Exorcist thing, and it's always a good one. So as for your other series, though, what sort of stuff do you have currently going on?
We're closing out. So I built a series of strictly urban fantasy called Oraceren, and I started a series called Mr. Brownstone. the unbelievable Mr. Brownstone. And so he's completely different than the main character Bethany Ann. And then more recently, we're releasing 2 or 3 new projects, as you had mentioned. LMBPN is a publishing company, and we produce a lot of IP. But one of them is the Zoo series, and that has to do. It's kind of paramilitary, where an alien spaceship decided that Earth needed to just go away, so it shot a missile at us, expecting the alien goop to produce alien flora and fauna that would consume us, and it would leave a pristine world for them when they came back in a couple of centuries. And unfortunately, mankind caught the missile. We figured out a little bit what was in it, but then, like mankind does, we started screwing with it. And so we created a oopsie in the Sahara Desert. Sahara.
Yeah, I don't know.
And so we have this alien place, but it is bringing such advantages to mankind with new alien genetics, new alien, almost like man, what in the world am I thinking of? It's almost like a goop that creates mankind and allows them to live forever, which
it's like
creates
post-human kind of stuff.
Yeah, nah,
or
not quite.
transhuman stuff, maybe. I don't know.
Well, I mean, theoretically, yeah, we could definitely go into that, but it's also if a serum that could solve all cancer, a serum that could heal a person of practically anything, a serum that can bring them back to the dead. Imagine, if you will, that if humanity, and especially different business entities, believed that capability was inside of this forbidden zone where it's as much going to kill you as you kill it. What would happen? What would happen? What would happen with the countries, all of them that have to get together and say, oh, by the way, we can't let this get out of this zoo area, this walled off area, because if it is, the world's dead. Not just your side of the world, not just my side of the world, all the world's going to die. So all of the countries have to work together, while you have bastards that are at the corporate level trying to steal stuff. And so it creates this opportunity for all of this conflict amongst not only normal, like I'm an American, so I write U.S. centric, but I design the zoo so that I can have collaborators from China, from France, from England, from wherever. And so we built it and designed it that way. So I'm kind of excited about that and see where that goes. And then we have new project that's coming online with it's somewhat of a gamelit scenario in science fiction. And so where technology, and where I see training and learning going in the future, and how it once again is causing bifurcation with society. The training that those who have the best VR pod learning compared to those school districts, if you will, that don't. And what happens with it. And so that is a little bit more in the true form of science fiction, where we look to the future and say, what if?
Right. Oh, that sounds. Yeah, all those sound really interesting, actually. I especially like the zoo as a concept. I think that's really neat.
Well, you should look into it, because that's a project where we are opening it up for other collaborators here very soon.
Okay. Interesting. I do like my world building a little bit much to generally write in anybody else's setting, but I'll give that a look.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So as far as your current work kind of workload, if you don't mind sharing, it would be kind of how many books do you write, or how many words do you write every, say, month, maybe? Or does that vary a lot?
It does somewhat vary, but I'm probably responsible for collaboratively, because there are a lot of collaboration books that are part of the company. So the company will put them out. I'll give you an example. Sarah Nofke and I have a series called it's not the Unbelievable, because I get her, but basically Unstoppable Live Bouffant. And it's an urban fantasy book. And we worked in the beginning pretty hard to create the characters, to create the milieu, to create the politics of what's going on, and to understand how we were going to write, what was happening in the first 4 books. But once that happened, my responsibility was to review the first book and make editorial changes and highlights. But I'm not part of, I'm not required to write on books 2, 3, and 4. Does that make sense?
Oh, so you're almost like a publisher for those later books more than, or
Yes.
like you collaborate on the beginning, so you establish the groundwork and then kind of set
Yes.
the collaborator off on their own path.
Correct. Absolutely. And so that is definitely more what I've set myself to do for, that my future career versus what I did in the beginning. In the beginning, I'd probably write 80 to 120,000 words a month ish.
Okay.
And that could be that I'd write nothing for 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks I'm pounding daily. And then, the book gets out, and then I'm like exhausted. I'm like, oh, I can't write again. And then 2 weeks later, okay, I got to write. And so, move it through. But I believe that a lot of us see, what are we best at? What is it that's compelling about the stories that I'm involved in versus compelling for other writers and the stories they do or don't do? And a lot of times it has to do with the understanding of the characters, the character motivations. What are the facets of those characters that create an interesting read? Unfortunately, a lot of authors are really good at setting what happens, but their characters are flat. And it's like, what does that mean? And so we worked those situations out, and I tried to bring out in my collaborators aspects of themselves which are interesting to a reader. An example could be, once again, I'll go back to the Saranofsky example. She has a very cynical humor to her, and she enjoys urban fantasy. She enjoys space opera. She writes both of those. But I said, if you're really trying to find something where you can put you into it, urban fantasy is rife with awesome female characters who are cynical, and that is the humor. So why don't we kind of focus what you do in real life into this particular area, and then we would work through the world building and everything else to make sure that it made sense and it was compelling.
No, I mean,
Now,
that's a good example though, because you fit kind of the aptitude of the author or their what's going to be special about their books to a genre, kind of in that
yes,
example anyway.
right. I mean, there's often it's said, that people should write about themselves, and I don't know that that's true. I've seen too many examples where some of the best stories were written from aspects of a person's personality. I'll give myself as an example here. When I wrote Arthurian Gambit, my personality is I get incredibly frustrated easily if I find something that doesn't feel like it's just, justice. Like it doesn't feel like it's correct. Apple versus Samsung is a great example. I understood intellectually that Samsung came from a country where stealing IT or IP is something that they just do. It's not misunderstood in their country. But for me, how much they ripped off Apple, and it's so friggin' obvious that I had problems with it so much that I was like, I wouldn't buy anything Samsung, period, even though they had really great products. Until such a time that Apple and Samsung went through the law courts, and Samsung finally, paid whatever they had to pay. And I'm like, okay, hey, I can buy it again. But that sense of justice that runs my personality is what I infused Bethany Ann with. And it just so happened that there are, 100,000 readers who are willing and love that sense of justice themselves because it resonates with them. So when you take a step back and you realize that I'm able to approach other readers who are all about justice because that's what runs them too, they have a natural inclination, a natural desire to read about that, and they like it. And that creates compelling readers who are willing to tell their friends about it.
Yeah, so it's like that. There's a pretty common piece of marketing advice. You say where people will say, think about what your product does for its consumer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what you're getting at there is for fiction. What kind of feeling does it engender the people are going, and what kind of people are going to enjoy that feeling?
True. I think that the way that I kind of backward engineered a lot of this stuff because I was writing from a sense of passion. And what did I want to read specifically? And so I set that up for the Arthurian Gambit that way. But as I tried to see why where was my success and why was it different from others that were, inside my class, if you will, the class of 2015, the class of 2016, and trying to reverse engineer some of that, it's just realizing that, our brains as readers, we're all about dopamine hits. And so I started to see, okay, where in my writing were the dopamine hits? Where was I giving it to the reader? And then I would push that sometimes and say, okay, You know what really is fun is when you have someone who is a complete asshole and you don't like them. They're a horrible individual and you feel like they really should get what's coming to them, and then let your main characters give it to them. That is such a rush. And then maybe allow it to see it from another direction as well. So I get to see not only it's almost like the person taking the ball over the end zone, not only from, the back, that you get to see how the offensive line broke it to allow them to get through, but you now see it from the defensive line, how the offense was able to crack it and they're coming running through, and just you get to viscerally feel that result multiple times.
Oh, that's an interesting. So you're saying, would you do that? Did you do that in a given book? Then is it kind of technique wise? Okay,
Yeah.
so you show the same kind of scene from multiple points of view, or is
I've
it
done
more
that.
like okay? But there are other ways to do it. Is the impression I'm getting?
Yeah, there is also more ways, but just think about it. It's like if you are a horror writer, that's the dopamine that you're selling.
Mm,
I've put it pretty blandly at times and said, we as authors are drug pushers. And the
right.
question is, do I push the horror drug that touches a person mentally? Do I push the love drug, romance? Do I put, what drugs am I pushing so that a person reading it is entertained? It's like there are some people who will read horror and they will love it. Personally, I can't finish one. I'm not built to enjoy that fear. It doesn't touch off anything that I enjoy whatsoever.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um, and I had something else, and I think I've slightly lost it.
Well,
Oh,
as far as horror goes, I mean, I think that's an interesting example of a genre because it's something that it makes a lot of us like makes me uncomfortable, and especially
mhm.
visceral horror now I just can't do anymore. But particularly visceral scenes in books. I've mentioned this on previous podcasts. Those are too much for me most of the time. If it gets gross in a blood and guts kind of way, it can be too much for me sometimes. But that's just and it's crazy that that's actually a thing because it used to be whatever, it didn't bother me at all. And I think that so definitely reader tastes and what works for a reader does change over time as well.
Exactly. And we had a situation where this is one of those early things you learn that you wish later you had figured it out. I'd learned that meeting new characters in a book was really compelling.
Mm.
It was a dopamine hit that for myself and for those that read my books that they looked forward to. So I had found out, or I believed I'd found out that relatively early, if I added like 1 to 2 new characters a book, it was a very easy way to get people to enjoy the book. Okay, so let's take that forward and do it 2 people a book for 5 or 10 books. And all of a sudden you're on book 8 or 9 and fans are going, well, what happened to Joe back in book 4? And you're like, oh God. And so I finally realized that I had overdone that situation and I had a dozen different characters that fans loved and I couldn't put them into a book. It's like I'd get to them every 3 or 4. It's like I really understood why there was a red wedding and that everyone gets wiped out.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. Is you just can't have that many characters in a story because you got a limited amount of time or space.
Correct. Yeah, you have your main characters that everyone loves, and then I had a core set of, let's say, 6 characters that were the secondaries, and then I was bringing in these 1 or 2 new ones every book just because it was a great hook, and people loved that feeling of who is this person. I mean, it just you can go down to the mental aspect of it, and then of course certain fans would be like, well, whatever happened to those 2 clowns? Those were great. And I'm like, oh goodness gracious.
So that's really interesting. I think, but you think that introducing the characters it's like a short. I mean, at least in the short term, it really did work.
Oh
On some
yes.
level. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, it absolutely worked. I mean, I kind of believe in what Steve Jobs talked about and just limit it to 3. So in the beginning, whenever I create a new series, I create a new set of characters. I always think about 3. Your main character has 3 aspects about them that a person can remember. And so for Bethany Ann, it was justice. There's no one that's going to be left behind, and she loves Coca-Cola. Those are her 3. And then you can build it, and then inside the book, there's only 3 main characters in the first book that you really had to learn, and then so on and so forth. You can expand it later, but in the beginning, don't give people more than 3 things to try to figure out. The rest of them, they can assume.
Oh, that's cool. So there's three. It's kind of like what was the thing where it's like there's only three things there's only three things that matter in a. Oh yeah, that was the Hollywood formula kind of where they're in a story where they say in a movie there's only three characters that matter.
Okay, I didn't
I
know it,
don't
but I
really
completely
ascribe to
get
it, but it's similar to what you're describing. Of course, they're not. Usually, your three are kind of a team, though, right? And you've got three like
Yes,
heroic characters.
yes. I mean, because really, for me, I wanted books. I wanted to be able to write books that the fans wanted to reread and to make some money. So, in order for me to want to reread them, you pretty much need to create characters that people want to visit again. Because it's one thing to create a book that's a bunch of explosions. I don't
Hmm.
know how many times we think we need to go reread about certain explosions happening again. But if you like the characters and you like the almost coming of age or the maturation of the characters as they grow together and they're having good times, you want to revisit those good times. It's no different than a bunch of friends getting together 10 years later and going, "Don't you remember when we did this?" I was like, "You were there the first time." But you relive that because it engenders the emotions again, and you bring them back to the surface. And so we reread books to do the same thing.
Yeah, no, that really does make sense. I just think just to go back to the Hollywood formula briefly. In that though, the three characters, one of them is the protagonist, one's the antagonist, and one is this like relationship character or lesson character.
Hmm.
And so it's more stripped down even than what you're talking about with your stuff. But yeah, in that case though, they would consider, it's interesting. I don't really think it's necessarily the best way to do it, especially in a book where books are far longer,
Hmm.
page count wise than say a screenplay is in many cases, or about the same like in other cases, to be honest.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, but a novel tends to be about 200 pages and a screenplay is about 100. So there's a big difference there.
Yeah, I think that most novels probably are 250 to 280 and up, and
Yeah.
there's certain benefits for being higher. I've found that a lot of times that a lot of readers, especially those that are that read more books, they don't even want to look at books less than 300. So
Mhm.
I've got books at 289 going, oh man, I 11
So
more
close.
pages.
Oh, yeah, that's that. Yeah, I've published a lot of shorter stuff, and at this point, and I find it kind of, yeah, it's kind of not the best attraction all the time. Obviously, there are other reasons behind that as well, but sometimes length can, yeah, people will say, "Oh, this was a short book. I liked it, but it was short." Like that's in every review at a certain point.
It is the only ones that I know that are particularly short on purpose are some what are called one night romance reads,
Mm.
where the person reading the romance, and I'm not going to go gender specific, but they want to come in, they want to get maybe a glass of wine or something, and they want to be able to read the story in one night and be done. That's it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So it's more like a movie in that way, kind of thing. Like you read it,
Hmm.
you spend a few hours, and yeah, that's it.
You're done. You
Oh,
don't have to worry about either staying up late, which some of us can't do anymore, or having to wait and read the rest of it later.
yeah. So with all that writing and publishing, do you have time to read as many books? Not as many books as you used to, for sure, but some
No.
books. No
Yeah, I
books.
do know some books now. I went through a period of time where I couldn't read other books because I had a critical mindset
Mm.
and I couldn't enjoy them. So I finally got past that, thankfully. And I do read some more books. I'm presently reading more in the lit RP, well, more like game lit.
Hmm.
I'm not really keen on heavy, what they call crunchy lit RPG. But I'm definitely reading more in the game lit area because we're building some of those products ourselves and writing them. So, um, but more fantasy, a little bit of sci-fi, not hard sci-fi. It's never been my gig. I like space opera. It's like, hey, we have a gate. Great. Now we're on the other side of the universe. Wonderful.
Let's have some fun over here. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. In the Cortherian Gambit, I was talking to Craig Martell the other day, and I said, even in the Cortherian Gambit, I had to create ways to get across the world in less than 15 hours because that took too long. I was like, I'm not twiddling my thumbs for 15 hours. So, let's create a new special pod that can get up into the atmosphere and across the world and down at such supersonic speeds that we can get there in 30 minutes.
Oh, that if only, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, I
Nice,
mean,
kind of nice to have that in the real world too. Though it would change
but
a lot.
it would change a lot. But even then, as a writer, we have the ability to create way more than what happens with movies. When I needed a $300 million yacht, I just went looking online until I found the yacht I wanted, and then I'm like, hey, I get to describe this yacht. It's now in my book, and I saved the company $289 million.
Oh yeah. Just the film rights thing that becomes a little more challenging, but that's a little bit far out for most of us. Maybe not so much for you though, to be honest. Right?
We've been approached a couple of times, and it's been interesting because Hollywood values themselves, in my opinion, pretty highly, and then they often want everything for nothing. And we're like,
no. Yeah. Yeah, I can understand that feeling a little bit. I mean, it's kind of like just because when I was a ghostwriter, I'd write for so little. Honestly, I mean, it's ridiculous how little I ended up writing some of those jobs for, especially early on. And then, but it is just frustrating how little writing and property like this gets valued. Honestly, by people who don't understand it, I guess, is the other thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably a whole different avenue of discussion that I would love to have, but particular readers might not want to listen to.
Oh, don't worry, we're almost out of time, so we're safe. As far as that goes, do you have any particular books you'd recommend from recent reads? Maybe one or two.
Mine or others?
Anybody else's? Yeah. Any other books? Yeah.
I particularly have enjoyed Dakota Kraut's Ritualist Chronicles, and I'm starting James Hunter's The Viridian Gate, and those are two on that side. In the past, I've liked some old Christopher Stashif stuff. I haven't read any of his new stuff. John Conroe has been a huge influence in my life. From the Trad Pub side, we have John Ringo. His Paladin of Shadows series I've particularly enjoyed. I actually, one of my kind of moments, Nathan Lowell, his quarter share, half share, full share, Captain Share series, I've enjoyed quite a bit. And I had my fangirl moment with Nathan one time. It was exciting for me. And so, but John Ringo, I wanted to give a shout out to his Mountain Tiger beer type stuff. And so I reached out through Mark Stigler, who was a Bain author until our company LMBPN was able to steal him. And he reached out to John, and I got permission from John, with email and everything else, to kind of talk about Mountain Tiger beer, which is just kind of such a cool moment for me.
Well, that is cool. Yeah, you reach out to an author who's he's like in a different world than a lot of us anyway. For starters, absolutely. And then in indies, we tend to be a bit separate from if not the same level from I mean traditional pub has its advantages, but it's serious disadvantages for sure. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, there's reasons to do both sides, and last year at SIFWA, the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America, was in Pittsburgh, and we were having a meeting, and it became very obvious that all of us who were encountering independent, indie publisher success, indie author success, owe so much to the authors and the people in the companies that created the desire for these products for the last 100 years.
That's a nice way to put it. And it's a good note to probably end this discussion on, because honestly, I'm kind of a little bit in awe. I don't think I fanboy, but I'm a little bit in awe of the amount of success you've had, especially. And
well, thank you.
Thanks for being on the show, and remind everybody where they can find your books.
Amazon for most of them. Just look up Michael Anderle or Kurtherian Gambit, and that's Kurtherian. Or if you just want to look up for almost everything, you can do it under the letters LMBPN, which stand for London, Madrid, Barcelona, Paris, and New York, which originally it was for the top 5 fashion capitals of the world, and it should have been Milan, not Madrid, but But anyway, lmbpn.com.
They're both M's. All right, yes. Great. And as for this show, you can find more episodes at mentalcellarpublications.com. You can find my books at amazon.com. Currently, I'm exclusive with the titles I have out there. And the new book, Ice War, it's out. It's space opera. So maybe check that out when you're done listening to this, and when you've checked out some of Michael's books, or recommendations. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll talk to you next week.
Take care. Thank you.